In a modern city where social contrasts were as visible as the shadows cast by skyscrapers, Amina had grown up in the shadow of the spotlight. Every street, every neighborhood of this city seemed to carry within it the imprint of another world, a world of luxury, privilege, and glory. But Amina had never looked for her place there. She was born into a family that lacked for nothing. Her father, an influential entrepreneur, was a recognized figure in finance and international business, and her mother, a fashion icon with timeless charm, was admired around the world for her unique sense of style and elegance. However, Amina, although the daughter of this powerful duo, never wanted to be defined by the successes of her parents. Since her childhood, she had always lived in a world where appearances were essential, where scrutinizing glances were both a blessing and a curse. At school, other students often considered her the big man's daughter, or the little star of the parade, without ever really trying to get to know her for who she really was. But Amina knew that her place was not in this world of stereotypes and projections. She chose to live apart, far from social events, charity dinners, and VIP evenings. She refused to follow the path traced by her name and her heritage. She had developed a discreet character, a mixture of gentleness and rigor which did not correspond to what society expected of her. She wanted to be recognized for her own merit, for her ideas, and not for the aura of the people around her. But that day, Amina decided it was time to step into the spotlight, if only for a moment. She was going to buy a dress. Not just any dress, but a dress that would mark a turning point in her life. A dress that would free her from the invisible burden of family inheritance. A dress that would symbolize her desire to finally stand up, alone, ready to face the gaze. She knew that the event she was buying it for was going to be important, not for the recognition she would get, but for how she perceived herself at that moment. It would be his act of silent rebellion against the idea that appearance and heritage define who you are. The store she went to, Parisian Elegance, was an institution in the upscale part of town. Tucked away in a cobblestone alley lined with luxury boutiques, the store was as understated as it was opulent, its glittering windows lighting up the night like stars suspended in the world of fashion. Inside, every corner seemed to be a living painting of luxury. Delicate silk fabrics, gold and diamond accessories, dresses of rare sophistication. Parisian Elegance was much more than a boutique. It was a temple dedicated to haute couture, a place where only the most privileged had the opportunity to enter. Customers who visited were rarely taken seriously if they didn't look like the image the store wanted to project. Rich, famous, or simply impeccably dressed. Every step, every movement, every word was measured, as if an individual's wealth was measured by their outward appearance. Amina, on the other hand, was neither of these things on the surface. She didn't have that pretentious look or that confident gait of the regulars of this place. She didn't carry a designer handbag or ostentatious jewelry. Her clothes were simple, but elegant, carefully chosen but unpretentious. She never wanted to seem like she was part of. But that day, in this store where she would never have imagined going alone, she had made the effort to dress with natural grace, in harmony with her own style, to mark her difference and her decision to enter this place. It was her way of saying that luxury was not just reserved for others. She belonged there too, in her own way. But what she didn't know was that her appearance would be immediately judged, and not by her true character. As soon as she walked through the door of the store, the atmosphere changed. An almost palpable cold fills the air, as if the store itself is analyzing the legitimacy of its presence. Mr. Lefebvre, the store manager, had not yet seen Amina approaching, but his instinct told him that she did not correspond to the usual clientele. He had learned to read people by the way they entered, by their gait, by the aura they gave off. Each customer who pushed the door of Parisian Elegance was subjected to invisible scrutiny. His gaze, precise and often disdainful, fixed on Amina as soon as she crossed the threshold. He quickly observed her clothes, then her face, and concluded that this young woman was just a simple loiterer, a person who was lost in the illusion of a world to which she did not belong. Amina calmly walked towards the aisles of dresses, a serene smile on her face, aware of the invisible judgments hovering around her. She was there with a specific mission, to find a dress that made her feel strong, beautiful, and ready to conquer whatever lay ahead. She knew this moment would be symbolic. It would be a silent victory for her. She chose a black dress, elegantly simple but marked by a delicate gold detail, which echoed her own soul. She didn't need to shine brightly. It was the inner intensity that carried her. Monsieur Lefebvre, however, did not believe for a moment that Amina could be a serious client. He followed her discreetly into the store, his eyes never leaving her. When he finally approached her, his tone was cold, almost accusatory, as if he doubted her ability to afford any of the store's creations. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, effortlessly hiding the skepticism in his voice. Amina, surprised by the obvious arrogance of the question, stared at him for a few seconds, refraining from responding ironically. Instead, she looked up and replied in a calm but firm tone. "Yes, I'm looking for a dress for a special event. Something classic, but distinctive." Monsieur Lefebvre scanned her from head to toe, his piercing and merciless gaze seeming to probe every detail of her person. Amina, dressed simply but with innate grace, seemed to be nothing more than a mirage in this temple of haute couture. He had seen dozens of young women like her enter the store, lose themselves in the illusion of luxury before leaving, disappointed, with empty pockets. He knew this type of client. They ventured into this world that they thought was accessible, but had neither the means nor the presence to find their place there. Lefebvre's look betrayed barely concealed judgment. He knew she was only there to look, not to buy. "A dress for a special event, you say?" he said in an icy voice, without blinking. "I suppose you have an idea of the budget?" He paused, his gaze resting almost condescendingly on her. "Because our pieces start from—" He left his sentence hanging, counting on his authoritarian tone to shut down the exchange before it even began. Her voice suggested that this was territory she could not even contemplate. Amina, far from being destabilized, remained perfectly calm. She knew what she wanted, and this icy attitude would only strengthen her resolve. She replied in a calm but firm tone, "I'm willing to spend whatever it takes for the perfect dress."
Show me what you have.
She added nothing more, her words sufficient to indicate that she was there neither to justify herself nor to be impressed. A heavy silence settled between them. Monsieur Lefebvre forced himself not to roll his eyes. He didn't expect this kind of response. The challenge in Amina's voice was palpable, but he was determined to put her in her place. He raised his eyebrows slightly before turning and starting to walk towards the shelves, not really paying attention to what she might find. He led her to the cheapest dresses in the store, the ones he deemed accessible to people like her. Simple, unpretentious dresses, which cost no more than a small luxury, but which, in her eyes, would be enough to satisfy a client like Amina. However, the latter did not let herself be discouraged by his cold attitude and obvious contempt. Instead, she focused on her search, her gaze scanning the shelves with meticulous attention, as if searching for something more than just fabrics. Each dress seemed to speak to her in its own way, but none of them gave her what she felt deeply: a need to mark her transition, to reinvent herself. She continued searching with her characteristic quiet determination, refusing to let the icy atmosphere around her get her down. Then, after a few minutes, she found it. A dress that was unlike any other. She wasn't just beautiful, she seemed to capture the essence of what Amina was looking for: pure, yet bold elegance. The black dress, simple but perfect in its cut, stood out with subtle gold details that caught the light in a delicate but striking way. It was a piece that didn't need to be seen from afar to impress. It looked like it was made for her. She didn't hesitate. She took it delicately, almost reverently, as if the dress was a symbol of something greater than a simple purchase. She looked at it one last time before turning to Monsieur Lefebvre, his voice calm but assured. "I'll try this one." Monsieur Lefebvre stared at her without saying a word. He didn't understand why she insisted on choosing this dress, but he let her. He watched her walk away, her sure, graceful steps leading her toward the fitting rooms.
Inside, the directors gasharden da little more.
He was convinced that this young woman was going to come back empty-handed. He didn't even give her the benefit of the doubt. He had seen these kinds of people too often, dreamers who believed that a high price could be erased by the simple desire to have it. In the fitting room, Amina slowly undressed and put on the dress. She looked at herself in the mirror, as if the reflection that came back to her was not only that of an elegant young woman, but also that of all the strength and confidence that she had spent years building. The dress seemed to fit her perfectly, as if it had been created not only for her figure, but for her soul. She instantly felt bigger, stronger, as if this piece was not just a piece of clothing, but a way to assert her identity in a world that had often judged her too quickly. She tossed and turned, letting herself be imbued with the feeling of power that this dress gave her. It wasn't the money that mattered, nor the outside judgment. What mattered was how she felt in that moment, a woman ready to face the world without fear. She walked out of the cabin with the same quiet confidence, her gait modified by the confidence the dress brought her. Monsieur Lefebvre watched her approach, his face marked by a satisfied, almost mocking smile. He thought he was right, that she would come back, head down, looking for an excuse. A smug smile appeared on his lips as he watched her arrive. "So," he said in a tone that was meant to be condescending, "I take it you've changed your mind about the price?" Amina stared at him without flinching. There was no hesitation in his eyes. His response, calm and firm, cut through all the arrogance that emanated from him. "No," she said simply. "I'm ready to buy this dress. I'm going to the checkout now." He guided her through the store, his gaze still piercing and calculating, while scrutinizing her behavior. Mr. Lefebvre couldn't help but think that this situation would end like all the others. She would give in, feel ashamed, and leave the store without buying anything. He expected her to become discouraged, to admit that she couldn't afford a dress of that value. As he led her between the rows of clothes, he cast furtive glances at her, but he remained convinced that, sooner or later, she would recognize the reality of her situation. The young woman seemed calm, but it was certain that she could not afford to spend on such luxury. When Amina finally arrived at the checkout, she put the dress down with perfect serenity, without even glancing at the other pieces still lying on the counter. The cashier, a young man with an expressive face, took the dress with almost visible enthusiasm. He scanned the label with a quick gesture, but when he was about to tap the screen to confirm the sale, his gaze suddenly fixed on the name of the credit card that Amina had just taken out. It was a bright, almost unreal gold card, and a name appeared on the screen: Amina S. Belkacem. A shiver of disbelief ran down the cashier's spine. He couldn't believe his eyes. This name. He recognized it. It was that of a renowned entrepreneur, an influential woman in the business world, often mentioned in trade journals and social networks. This name was synonymous with success and power. Incomprehension showed on his face as his fingers trembled slightly as they pressed the screen to finalize the transaction. She was no ordinary customer. She was not a woman who could be judged on superficial appearances. "Miss Belkacem, he began, but he suddenly felt embarrassed by the extent of his own hasty judgment. His words caught in his throat, not knowing how to repair the offense he had done, even if he had not been directly responsible for his superior's judgments. Amina looked up at him, a slight smile playing on her lips, a smile that was not one offered out of sympathy, but rather out of dignified and quiet politeness. She responded in a calm tone, but the nuance of her voice betrayed a slight amusement, as if she knew perfectly well where this conversation was going to take them. "Yes," she said, and added, in a voice that was almost deliberately gentle, "It seems like price isn't an issue after all, right?" The cashier, embarrassed, didn't know where to go. He had seen customers use gold credit cards many times, but never had he felt such weight behind a transaction. The humiliation of having hastily judged a woman he barely knew hit him hard. He looked down and quickly pressed the button to finalize the payment, hoping that it might somehow erase the discomfort he felt. Mr. Lefebvre, who was observing the scene from behind the counter, saw the expression on the cashier's face change instantly. He widened his eyes, completely unsettled. What he thought would be a simple exchange of goods turned into a much more significant moment. He observed the way Amina interacted with the staff, calmly confident, as if she didn't even notice the effect she was having. The contempt he had had for her was now turning into a painful realization. He realized that he had made a big mistake. When he finally turned to her, his face was red with shame, his arrogance disappearing under the weight of reality. "I'm sorry, Miss Belkacem," he said, his words filled with regret. "I didn't want." He hesitated, the words jostling in his mouth, unable to come out properly. But Amina interrupted him, cutting his clumsy apology short, as if she had heard this kind of speech many times before. She replied with icy politeness, her voice unyielding and serene. "You judged me without even knowing me. You thought my presence here was a mistake, but in reality it was your attitude that was wrong." Her words were firm, but each carried an obvious truth that could not be denied. She had faced Lefebvre's arrogance with implacable dignity, never stooping to bitterness or anger. The lesson she offered was clear: respect was non-negotiable, and no one had the right to judge others based on their appearance or their prejudices. Amina collected her dress, a gesture that symbolized more than just a purchase. She had done it not only for herself, but also to put things in their place. As she prepared to leave, she gave Monsieur Lefebvre one last look, a look that carried all the wisdom of the situation. "It's not just the dress I'm wearing, Monsieur Lefebvre," she said as she walked away, her tone laced with calm firmness. "It is my dignity and my ability to ignore the judgments of others. I advise you to think about it." As she left the store, Amina knew that this incident was not trivial. It wasn't just about dress, but about personal power, respect, and how people can be judged unfairly on superficial grounds. She wasn't just making a transaction, she had offered a lesson in human dignity, in how stereotypes and judgments can be shattered in an instant. She felt light, stronger than ever, knowing that this day marked a turning point in her life. Amina's story spread quickly in social circles, carried by influential friends, colleagues, and even strangers who identified with her fight against invisible discrimination. Many voices were raised in support, sharing his experience on social networks and in the media. Mr. Lefebvre, for his part, did not take long to realize that he had lost much more than a customer that day. Not only had he nearly lost his status, but he had also left an irreversible impression of ignorance and arrogance that would follow him far beyond this incident. What he had thought was a simple matter of power had turned into a public humiliation, because, in reality, he had lost his credibility and his place in a world where appearance could no longer hide the truth.